I was standing on what I thought was my own backyard when Patricia Henderson marched across the grass with a clipboard, and that look on her face, the one that told me my peaceful Saturday morning was about to go straight to hell. "Mr. Yates," she called out, her heels sinking into the soft earth near my garden. "You need to remove these vegetables immediately. This land belongs to the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and unapproved landscaping is strictly prohibited." I set down my shovel and wiped the dirt from my hands, trying to process what she'd just said. "Excuse me. This is my property, Patricia. I've been gardening here for 3 months since I bought this house." She adjusted her oversized sunglasses and thrust the clipboard toward me. "Actually, according to our records, the HOA has maintained ownership of this parcel for the past 20 years. It's clearly outlined in the community bylaws. You're currently trespassing on association property." The whole situation felt surreal. I'd purchased my home in Meadowbrook Estates, a planned community just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, back in February. The property survey I'd received during closing showed clear boundaries. My lot extended a full acre and a half, including the area where I now stood. I'd spent weeks preparing the soil, planting tomatoes, peppers, and squash, dreaming of fresh vegetables all summer. "Patricia, I have the deed and survey right inside. This land is mine. I paid for it." She shook her head with that infuriating confidence that only an HOA president could muster. "Your documents are incorrect. The HOA has been managing this space as a community green area since 2006. Just because your title company made an error doesn't change the facts." I felt my jaw tighten. "Then show me your documentation." "I don't need to prove anything to you," she snapped. "I'm giving you 48 hours to remove everything you've planted, or the association will do it for you and bill you for the labor. Consider this your official notice." She spun on her heel and marched back toward the walking path that bordered what she claimed was HOA property. I stood there, dirt under my fingernails, watching her retreat while my blood pressure climbed. This was insane. I'd done everything right, hired a real estate attorney, got title insurance, had the property professionally surveyed. There was no way the HOA owned my land. But Patricia Henderson wasn't the type to bluff. She'd been the Meadowbrook Estates HOA president for 6 years, and according to my neighbors, she ran the association like a personal fiefdom. She'd fine people for having the wrong shade of mailbox, forced homeowners to repaint their shutters because they were half an inch too wide, and once tried to ban a resident service dog because it wasn't on the approved breed list. I went inside and pulled out my closing documents. The property description was crystal clear. Lot 47, Meadowbrook Estates subdivision, containing 1.52 acres, with boundaries clearly marked on the attached survey map. I traced my finger along the lines: north to the oak tree, east to the drainage ditch, south to the property line fence, and west to the road. The area where my garden sat was smack in the middle of my lot, at least 100 feet from any boundary. My phone rang. It was Derek, my real estate attorney who'd handled the closing. "Connor, hey, I just got the strangest call from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA attorney," he said, sounding puzzled. "They're claiming you've encroached on association common area. Patricia Henderson just threatened to tear up my garden because she says the HOA owns the land. Derek, you saw the survey. This is ridiculous." I heard papers rustling on his end. "Let me pull your file." "Okay, yeah, I'm looking at it now. Connor, your survey is solid." It was done by Morrison Land Surveying. They're one of the best firms in the state. And I verified the legal description against the county records before we closed. That land is definitely yours. So what do? First, don't let them touch anything on your property. Second, I'm going to request copies of whatever documentation they think they have. Third, if they push this, we might need to file a quiet title action to settle this once and for all. A what? Quiet title action. It's a lawsuit that asks the court to determine who actually owns disputed property. It quiets any challenges to the title, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. These things are usually just misunderstandings. I wanted to believe him, but the look in Patricia's eyes told me this wasn't going to be simple. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my garden destroyed. The tomato plants had been ripped from the ground, the pepper cages tossed aside, and the carefully tended beds trampled. A bill for $800 was taped to my front door, along with a violation notice citing unauthorized use of common area. I called Derek immediately, my hands shaking with anger. They destroyed my garden. Did you give them permission to enter your property? Hell no. Then they just committed trespass and property destruction. Take photos of everything right now, and I mean everything. Then we're filing that quiet title action. This has gone too far. Over the next week, I learned just how deep this situation went. Derek requested the HOA's documentation supporting their ownership claim, and what came back was a mess of confusing paperwork. There was a 2006 declaration amendment that supposedly transferred certain undeveloped parcels to the HOA for community use and preservation. The legal description attached to that amendment was vague at best. It referenced portions of the Southern Development Area as marked on the community master plan. The problem was, nobody could produce the actual master plan they referenced. Derek dug through county records and found that the original Meadowbrook Estates development had been planned in 3 phases. Phase 1 was completed in 2004, Phase 2 in 2006, and Phase 3, which included my property, wasn't finished until 2008. The timing alone raised questions about how the HOA could have claimed my land in 2006 when it hadn't even been subdivided yet. But when Derek confronted the HOA's attorney, a smug guy named Richard Blackstone, with this information, Richard just laughed it off. The declaration amendment is valid and recorded. Your client's survey is the error, not our claim. The association has maintained that land for 20 years, and adverse possession alone would give us rights even if the paperwork were questionable, which it isn't. That word adverse possession sent me down a research rabbit hole. Under North Carolina law, someone could claim ownership of land they didn't originally own if they'd used it openly, notoriously, continuously, and exclusively for 20 years. The HOA was essentially arguing that even if they hadn't owned my land initially, they owned it now because they'd been treating it as theirs since 2006. Except that was garbage. I pulled up old satellite imagery of the property using Google Earth's historical feature. In 2006, the area where my house now stood was still undeveloped woodland. In 2008, construction had begun. By 2009, my house was complete, and the lot was clearly defined with a fence and landscaping. The area where my garden sat had been part of someone's yard from day one. I started tracking down previous owners. According to county records, the house had been built by a developer named Hartman Construction in 2008 and sold to a family named the Mitchells. They'd lived there until 2015, when they sold to another family, the Rodriguezes. The Rodriguezes had owned it until 2022, selling it to a single woman named Jennifer Pratt, who'd only lived there a year before selling to me. I found Marcus Rodriguez on Facebook and sent him a message explaining the situation. He responded within hours. "Man, that's crazy," his message read. "We lived there for 7 years and never had any issues with the HOA claiming our land. We had a swing set in that exact area where you're talking about. Patricia Henderson tried to fine us once for the color of our deck furniture, but she never said anything about the property boundaries. I asked if he had any photos from when they lived there. He sent me dozens birthday parties, family barbecues, their kids playing in the yard. Every single photo showed their use of the full property, including the disputed area. The timestamps went back to 2015. I reached out to the Mitchells next, which took more effort, but I finally got Sarah Mitchell on the phone. She was retired now, living in Florida, but she remembered the property well. "We built that house," she told me. "My husband was a contractor, and he worked with Hartman on the development. We specifically chose that lot because it was one of the larger parcels. We had the property surveyed before construction, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the whole lot was ours. The HOA never said otherwise." "Did you ever have any disputes with the HOA?" She laughed bitterly. "Oh, plenty, but not about property lines. Patricia Henderson and her crew were always finding something to complain about. Our mailbox was 2 inches too tall, our grass was the wrong shade of green, our Christmas lights stayed up 3 days past New Year's, but they never claimed our land." This was the ammunition I needed. Derek filed the quiet title action in Mecklenburg County Superior Court in early June. The complaint was straightforward. I was the legal owner of Lot 47. The HOA's claim was baseless, and I wanted the court to confirm my ownership and clear any cloud on my title. The HOA's response came 3 weeks later, and it was aggressive. They counterclaimed, asking the court not only to confirm their ownership, but to award them damages for my trespass and order me to pay their attorney fees. They attached a huge stack of documents, the 2006 Declaration Amendment, photos of what they claimed was the HOA maintaining the area over the years, and affidavits from board members swearing that the association had always treated this land as common property. Looking through their evidence made my stomach turn. The photos were particularly troubling. They showed HOA groundskeepers mowing grass, planting flowers, and maintaining what appeared to be the area in question. Except when I looked closer, the backgrounds didn't match. The trees were wrong, the angles were off. These photos weren't of my property at all. I showed them to Derek. "These are from somewhere else in the neighborhood." He squinted at his computer screen, zooming in on one image. "You might be right. See that building in the background? That's the community clubhouse. Your property isn't anywhere near the clubhouse. They're fabricating evidence. Let's not jump to conclusions yet, but we definitely need to investigate this thoroughly." We hired a professional surveyor to do a comprehensive boundary survey of my property and the surrounding area. Morrison Land Surveying sent out a team that spent 3 days taking measurements, checking monuments, and creating detailed maps. The lead surveyor, a gruff man named Tom Morrison, met with me when they finished. "Mr. Yates, your property boundaries are exactly where your closing survey indicated. No question about it. I also looked at the legal description in the HOA's 2006 Declaration Amendment, and it's a mess. The description references parcel numbers that don't exist and boundary markers that were never placed. Honestly, I don't think it describes any specific piece of land. It's gibberish. How does something like that get recorded?" He shrugged. "The Register of Deeds office doesn't verify the content of documents. They just record what's submitted. If someone writes up a declaration that says they own the moon, the county will record it. Doesn't make it valid." This was huge. Derek immediately filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's counterclaim, attaching Morrison's survey report and his professional opinion that the HOA's legal description was invalid. We also filed our own request for sanctions, arguing that the HOA had submitted fraudulent evidence. The judge assigned to our case was the Honorable Margaret Chen, a no-nonsense jurist known for her impatience with frivolous litigation. The first hearing was scheduled for mid-July, and I took a day off work to attend. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse was an imposing modern building in downtown Charlotte. I met Derek in the hallway outside the courtroom, and he briefed me on what to expect. This is just a preliminary hearing on the motions. Judge Chen will hear arguments, maybe ask some questions, but she probably won't rule from the bench. She'll take it under advisement and issue a written order later. Patricia Henderson arrived with Richard Blackstone, and two other HOA board members. I recognized Carol Summers and Frank Patterson. Patricia shot me a cold glare before taking her seat on the opposite side of the courtroom. When Judge Chen took the bench, she got right to business. All right, we have cross motions to dismiss and a request for sanctions. Mr. Cunningham, you're representing the plaintiff. Let's start with you. Derek stood and launched into a clear, concise argument. The HOA's claim was based on a 2006 declaration amendment with an invalid legal description that didn't actually describe any identifiable parcel of land. My property wasn't even subdivided in 2006, so there was no way the HOA could have claimed it then. The evidence showed continuous use of the property by lawful owners since 2008, negating any adverse possession claim. And the photos submitted by the HOA appeared to be fraudulent, showing locations nowhere near the disputed property. Richard Blackstone rose to respond, and his argument was all smoke and mirrors. He insisted the 2006 declaration was perfectly valid, that the association had a long history of managing the land, and that my survey was the questionable document. He pointed to the affidavits from board members and argued that their testimony about maintaining the property should be given weight. Judge Chen interrupted him. "Counselor, I've reviewed the legal description in your client's declaration amendment. Can you point to it on a map?" Richard fumbled with his papers. "Your Honor, the description refers to the community master plan, which shows you have that master plan. We're working to locate a copy. The original developer is no longer in business, and so you're claiming ownership of land based on a reference to a document you don't have." Judge Chen's tone was sharp. "And your legal description references parcel numbers. Can you provide documentation of those parcel numbers from the county? The county's records from that time period are incomplete, Your Honor." Judge Chen looked over her glasses at him. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm struggling to understand how your client can claim to own property when you can't identify what property you're claiming to own." I saw Patricia lean forward and whisper urgently to Richard. He nodded and turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, even if there are technical deficiencies in the legal description, the association's adverse possession claim stands. We've openly and notoriously maintained this property for 20 years. Mr. Cunningham, what's your response to the adverse possession claim?" Derek stood again. "Your Honor, the undisputed evidence shows that the property in question has been part of residential lots since 2008. Previous owners used it as their private yard. That defeats any claim of exclusive, continuous use by the HOA. Moreover, adverse possession requires 20 years of such use in North Carolina. Even if we generously assumed the HOA began using this land in 2006, which the evidence contradicts, that's only 18 years. The statutory period hasn't been met." Judge Chen made a note. "What about these photographs the HOA submitted?" "We believe they're fraudulent, Your Honor. Our surveyor identified multiple inconsistencies showing they were taken at different locations within the development, not the disputed property." That's a serious allegation, Mr. Cunningham. Yes, Your Honor. That's why we've requested sanctions. The judge turned back to Richard. Mr. Blackstone, can you authenticate these photographs? You know who took them when they were taken and confirm they show the specific property at issue. Richard looked uncomfortable. They were provided by the HOA board members, Your Honor. They represent the board's institutional knowledge of maintaining this area over the years. That's not authentication. I'm not going to consider evidence that hasn't been properly authenticated, especially when opposing counsel has raised specific concerns about fraud. Patricia whispered to Richard again, more urgently this time. He held up a hand to quiet her and address the court. Your Honor, perhaps we could have a brief recess to confer with our client. No, you've had months to prepare your case. I'm ready to rule on the motion to dismiss the counterclaim. Based on the evidence presented, the HOA's claim fails as a matter of law. The legal description in the 2006 declaration is insufficient to identify any specific property. The adverse possession claim fails on both the exclusivity element and the time requirement, and the photographic evidence is not authenticated and appears questionable. The counterclaim is dismissed with prejudice. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Derek squeezed my shoulder, but Judge Chen wasn't done. As for the plaintiff's motion to dismiss the HOA's challenge to his title, that motion is granted as well. Mr. Yates has presented clear documentation of his ownership, including a recent professional survey. The HOA has failed to present any credible evidence contradicting that ownership. Richard tried to interject. Your Honor, we'd like to request. I'm not finished, Mr. Blackstone. On the question of sanctions, I'm taking that under advisement. I want sworn depositions from each board member who signed those affidavits, and I want detailed information about the photographs who took them, when, where, and under what circumstances. You have 30 days. If I find that evidence was knowingly fabricated, this court will not hesitate to impose significant sanctions, including attorney fees and costs. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, Patricia tried to intercept me in the hallway. This isn't over, Mr. Yates. Just because one judge, Derek, stepped between us. Miss Henderson, you should not be speaking to my client. Any communication goes through me. She glared at him but backed off, stomping away with her entourage in tow. That went well, Derek said, allowing himself a small smile. Judge Chen basically eviscerated their case. Now we just need to get through the depositions and hopefully wrap this up. The depositions were scheduled for August. Derek deposed Patricia Henderson first, and I sat in the conference room at his office watching her squirm under questioning. Miss Henderson, you signed an affidavit stating that you personally witnessed HOA groundskeepers maintaining the disputed property for the past 8 years. Is that correct? Yes, Patricia said, her voice tight. And where were you standing when you witnessed this maintenance? I don't remember every specific instance. Give me one specific instance. One time you actually saw groundskeepers working on Mr. Yates's property. She shifted in her chair. It was several years ago. I was driving through the neighborhood and saw them mowing. What year? I'm not certain. Maybe 2018 or 2019. What time of day? Morning, I think. What were the weather conditions? I don't remember. What color was the mower? Green, maybe, or red? Derek pulled out one of the photos the HOA had submitted. Is this one of the occasions you're referring to? Patricia studied the photo. It could be. Miss Henderson, this photo shows the community clubhouse in the background. Mr. Yates's property is over half a mile from the clubhouse. So this photo couldn't possibly show maintenance of his property, could it? That must be a different occasion. So this photo doesn't support your affidavit. There are multiple photos. Derek went through each photograph, methodically demonstrating that none of them showed the disputed property. Patricia grew more defensive with each question, finally admitting that she'd assumed the photos showed the right area but hadn't personally verified their locations. Who provided these photos to the HOA's attorney? Carol Summers was in charge of gathering evidence. Carol Summers' deposition was even more damaging. She admitted under oath that she'd pulled the photos from the HOA's general files, images that had been taken over the years for the association newsletter and other purposes. She'd selected ones that looked like the disputed area, but had made no effort to confirm their actual locations. So you knowingly submitted photographs to the court that you hadn't verified showed the property in question? Derek asked. I thought they were representative, Carol said weakly. Representative of what? Of the kind of maintenance we do. But not of maintenance actually performed on Mr. Yates's property. She hesitated. I suppose not specifically, no. By the time depositions wrapped up in late August, the HOA's case had completely fallen apart. Derek compiled the deposition transcripts and filed a renewed motion for sanctions, along with a motion for summary judgment on my quiet title claim. Judge Chen's order came down in mid-September, and it was scathing. She found that the HOA board members had been recklessly indifferent to the truth in submitting the photographs and affidavits. While she stopped short of finding intentional fraud, she concluded that their conduct warranted sanctions. The HOA was ordered to pay my attorney fees and costs, which totaled nearly $40,000. More importantly, she granted summary judgment on my quiet title action, issuing a declaratory judgment that I was the sole owner of all 1.52 acres of Lot 47, and that the HOA had no ownership interest whatsoever in any portion of my property. The judgment was to be recorded with the Register of Deeds, permanently clearing any cloud on my title. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A week after Judge Chen's order, I received a formal notice from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, now with Patricia removed as president, and Carol Summers taking over, informing me that my property was being assessed a special fee of $50,000 for enhanced community services and infrastructure improvements. The timing was obviously retaliatory, but the letter cited legitimate HOA powers under the covenants to levy special assessments. I called Derek in a panic. Can they do this? He read through the notice carefully. Technically, yes. The covenants allow for special assessments with a 2/3 vote of the board. But this is clearly retaliation, and we can challenge it. The problem is, fighting it could take months, and in the meantime, they can file a lien against your property for non-payment. So they lost in court, and now they're just going to harass me with fake fees until I give up or go broke. That's probably their strategy, yes. But Connor, we have another option. We can go after them for harassment and seek an injunction prohibiting retaliatory actions. We might also have a claim for abuse of process. I authorized him to file whatever he needed to file. At this point, I was beyond caring about the cost. This was about principle. But before Derek could file the new lawsuit, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a woman named Brenda Lewis, who introduced herself as a homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates. Mr. Yates, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the neighborhood directory. I wanted to thank you for standing up to the HOA. Thank me. My husband and I have been fighting them for 3 years over a boundary dispute of our own. They claimed part of our backyard for a utility easement and tried to put in a drainage system that would have destroyed our patio. We didn't have the resources to fight them legally, so we just gave up. But seeing what you've accomplished, we're inspired to try again. Over the next few days, I received similar calls from 6 other homeowners. Each had a story of HOA overreach, improper fines, disputed property claims, selective enforcement of rules. Many had paid money they shouldn't have paid, simply because fighting seemed impossible. One homeowner, Robert Chen, told me about a pattern he'd noticed. Patricia Henderson and the board have been systematically targeting properties along the southern edge of the development, where your house is, with these boundary disputes and assessments. I think they've been trying to acquire land to increase the common areas, which would increase the association's asset value. It's a scam. That gave me an idea. I called Derek and pitched it to him. What if we organize the homeowners, make this a class action or at least a coordinated effort? That could work, Derek said thoughtfully. If we can show a pattern of abuse, it strengthens everyone's case, and it splits the legal costs among multiple plaintiffs. We organized a meeting at my house the following Saturday. 23 homeowners showed up, cramming into my living room with stories of HOA abuse. Derek explained the legal options, and by the end of the meeting, 15 homeowners had agreed to join together in a lawsuit against the HOA for various claims: quiet title issues, improper assessments, harassment, and breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit we filed in October was a monster, over 100 pages with multiple counts and 15 plaintiffs. It asked for declaratory relief, injunctions, damages, and attorney fees. The local news picked up the story, running a piece titled "Homeowners Unite Against Meadowbrook Estates HOA Abuse." The publicity was a game changer. Suddenly, the HOA board was under scrutiny, not just from the court but from the entire community. A petition circulated demanding the resignation of the entire board. The management company that administered the HOA distanced themselves from the board's decisions. And most importantly, the HOA's insurance company got involved. I got a call from Derek in early November with interesting news. The HOA's liability insurance carrier just contacted me. They're worried about their exposure on this case, especially with the sanctions Judge Chen already imposed. They want to discuss settlement. Settlement, like they pay us to go away. More like they agree to rescind all the disputed assessments, confirm everyone's property boundaries, and implement new governance procedures to prevent future abuse, plus attorney fees for everyone involved. The settlement negotiations took 6 weeks. The insurance company's attorney was a straight shooter named Michael Torres, who made it clear he thought the HOA board had been reckless and wanted to resolve things quickly. The stumbling block was the board itself, particularly Carol Summers and Patricia Henderson, who still had influence even though she'd been removed as president. They didn't want to admit wrongdoing. They didn't want to pay attorney fees. They wanted to include confidentiality clauses so homeowners couldn't discuss the settlement. Michael Torres finally had to get on the phone with them directly and explain reality. Ladies and gentlemen, your insurance policy has $1 million limit. You're facing claims that could easily exceed that, especially with 15 plaintiffs and proven sanctions for bad faith. If this goes to trial, you could be personally liable for any judgment above the policy limits. I'm recommending you accept these settlement terms because they're the best deal you're going to get. The settlement was finalized in mid-December. Under its terms, all property boundary disputes were resolved in favor of the homeowners based on recorded surveys. The HOA acknowledged it had no ownership interest in any disputed parcels. All special assessments levied in the past year were rescinded, and any money paid was refunded with interest. The HOA agreed to pay $230,000 in attorney fees and costs, split among the 15 plaintiffs and their attorneys. The HOA board agreed to adopt new bylaws requiring third-party mediation before any property dispute could be pursued legally, and requiring board approval by a 75% vote before any special assessment exceeding $5,000 could be levied. Patricia Henderson, Carol Summers, and Frank Patterson agreed to resign from the board immediately and not seek re-election for at least 5 years. The HOA would issue a written apology to all affected homeowners. It was a complete victory. When I signed the settlement agreement in Derek's office 2 days before Christmas, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying. "Connor, you did good here," Derek said, shaking my hand. "You could have given up when they destroyed your garden. Most people would have. Instead, you stood your ground, fought the good fight, and ended up helping a lot of your neighbors in the process." "I just wanted to grow some tomatoes," I said, laughing. "Well, you can grow all the tomatoes you want now, and you've got clear title to prove it." The settlement money I received, about $18,000 after attorney fees were deducted, went straight into rebuilding my garden, better than before. I installed raised beds, a proper irrigation system, and a greenhouse. My neighbors from the lawsuit helped with the construction one weekend in January, turning it into a celebration. Brenda Lewis brought champagne. Robert Chen brought his grill and made burgers. We stood in my backyard, my legally confirmed, undisputed backyard, and toasted to standing up to bullies. "What are you going to do with all this garden space?" Brenda asked, looking at the elaborate setup. "Well, I was thinking maybe we could make it a community garden," I said. "Not the HOA's community, but ours. Anyone who helped fight this battle can have a plot. We'll grow vegetables together." The idea took off immediately. By spring, 12 families had claimed plots in what we called the Freedom Garden, a name suggested by Robert's teenage daughter. We grew tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans, lettuce, and herbs. More than that, we grew a real community, one based on mutual support rather than petty rules and power trips. The HOA limped along with a new board that was considerably more humble. They stuck to actual community concerns, maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, handling legitimate shared expenses. The reign of terror was over. I ran into Patricia Henderson one day at the grocery store in March. She was in the produce section, ironically, examining tomatoes. When she saw me, her face went red and she quickly pushed her cart toward another aisle. I almost let her go, but something made me call out, "Patricia, wait." She stopped, turning slowly, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to say that I hope you've learned something from all this. You had power in the HOA and you abused it. A lot of people got hurt. A lot of money got wasted. And for what?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something crack in her facade. Her shoulders sagged. "I thought I was protecting property values. I thought I was maintaining standards. I thought." "You thought being in charge meant you could do whatever you wanted," I finished. "But that's not how it works. Not in an HOA, not anywhere." "I lost a lot too, you know," she said quietly. "My reputation, my position. Friends in the neighborhood won't talk to me anymore. That's what happens when you abuse people's trust. But here's the thing, Patricia. You can learn from this. You can be better. Or you can stay bitter and angry and blame everyone else. That's your choice." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but instead she just nodded once and walked away. I don't know if my words made any difference to her. Probably not. But I'd said what needed to be said. The quiet title action I'd filed had accomplished exactly what it was supposed to do. It established definitively and permanently that I owned my property, all of it, without any cloud or competing claim. The judgment was recorded in the county land records. meaning anyone who ever searched the title to my property in the future would see that the question had been asked and answered by a court of law. But more than that, the whole ordeal had proven something important. Homeowners don't have to be powerless against HOA abuse. The law provides remedies. Courts will listen. And when people stand together, they can fight back effectively. I thought about that a lot as I worked in my garden that first spring after the settlement. The tomato plants were already a foot tall by April, climbing their cages with determination. The pepper plants were flowering. The squash was spreading its broad leaves across the soil I'd enriched with compost. This land was mine. I had the deed, the survey, the court judgment, and most importantly, the peace of mind that comes from knowing the truth had been established beyond any doubt. The HOA had claimed it for 20 years, or at least they'd tried to claim it. They'd intimidated previous owners, destroyed my first garden, filed bogus counterclaims, and attempted to bully me into submission. But when push came to shove, when we actually put the question to a neutral judge with real evidence and proper legal procedures, the answer was clear. They'd never owned a single acre, not 1 square foot. Their entire claim had been built on vague documents, fabricated evidence, and the hope that nobody would ever challenge them seriously. The quiet title action had quieted their lies permanently. Derek called me one afternoon in late April with an update I hadn't expected. "Connor, you're not going to believe this. The North Carolina State Bar just opened an investigation into Richard Blackstone. The HOA's attorney, former attorney. Apparently, several of his other clients started questioning his work after our case got publicity. One of them filed a bar complaint alleging he submitted false evidence in a different property dispute. The bar is looking at his conduct in our case too, particularly the photographs and affidavits. Could he be disbarred? It's possible. At minimum, he's looking at a suspension and probably some hefty fines. The bar takes evidence fabrication very seriously. I didn't feel any satisfaction from that news, just a kind of tired vindication. So many people had enabled the HOA's abuse board members who went along with Patricia's schemes. An attorney who was willing to submit questionable evidence. Homeowners who looked the other way when their neighbors were being targeted. It had taken a complete breakdown and a public legal battle to finally bring accountability. But accountability had come, and that mattered. In May, the neighborhood held its annual HOA meeting to elect new board members. The turnout was the highest in Meadowbrook Estates history. Over 200 homeowners packed into the community clubhouse. The new board candidates all ran on platforms of transparency, accountability, and limited government. Brenda Lewis was elected president. Robert Chen became treasurer. The new board's first action was to commission a comprehensive survey of all HOA-claimed common areas and record proper legal descriptions for each. No more vague references to non-existent master plans. Everything would be documented, clear, and verifiable. They also established an ombudsman position, a neutral third-party homeowners could contact with complaints or concerns, who would investigate and mediate before issues escalated to legal battles. I was asked to serve in that role, and after some hesitation, I accepted. It seemed right somehow, to take the experience I'd gained and use it to help others navigate HOA disputes before they spiraled out of control. My garden flourished that summer. I harvested over 200 pounds of tomatoes, gave away bushels of peppers to neighbors, and discovered that I had a real talent for growing herbs. The Freedom Garden became a neighborhood institution. People would stop by in the evenings to water their plots and chat, sharing gardening tips and stories. One evening in July, I was staking up some particularly ambitious tomato plants when a car pulled up, and a woman got out. I didn't recognize her at first, but then she called my name. Connor Yates. I'm Jennifer Pratt. I used to own your house. Jennifer was the person I'd bought the property from, the one-year owner between the Rodriguez family and me. We'd never actually met in person. The closing had been handled remotely while she was already relocating for a new job. Jennifer, hi, what brings you back to Charlotte? I'm in town visiting friends, and I heard about what happened with the HOA. Connor, I feel terrible. I had no idea they were going to claim your land. When I lived here, they never said anything to me about it. It wasn't your fault, I assured her. They didn't say anything because they knew their claim was bogus. They waited until they thought they had a target who might not fight back. Still, I wish I'd known. I would have warned you or documented something, or... She trailed off, looking at the garden. This is beautiful, by the way. I never did much with the yard when I lived here. We talked for a while about the case, the settlement, the changes in the HOA. She told me she was glad it had worked out, that she'd always felt something was off about Patricia Henderson and the board, but had never been able to put her finger on it. They were small-time tyrants, I said. They had just enough power to make people's lives miserable, and they used it. But they picked the wrong fight this time. After Jennifer left, I thought about all the different threads that had led to this outcome. If I'd been a different person, less stubborn or more willing to accept what I was told, I might have just removed my garden and forgotten about it. If Derek hadn't been such a thorough attorney, we might not have found the holes in the HOA's documentation. If Judge Chen hadn't been willing to call out the fabricated evidence, the case might have dragged on for years. If other homeowners hadn't stepped forward to share their stories, the pattern of abuse might never have been exposed. It had taken all of those elements coming together to achieve justice. And even then, it had been expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. The system worked, but it didn't work easily. That's why the ombudsman role felt important. If I could help even one homeowner resolve a dispute without needing a $40,000 lawsuit, it would be worth it. The first case I handled came in August. A homeowner named Tom Fitzgerald contacted me because the new HOA board had cited him for having a boat in his driveway, which violated the covenants. Tom argued that he'd been storing his boat there for 3 years without any complaints, and several other neighbors had boats visible from the street. I reviewed the covenants, which did indeed prohibit boats in driveways, but allowed them in side yards if screened from view. I checked the neighborhood and confirmed that the rule was being enforced inconsistently. Then I met with Tom and the board together. Tom's been doing this for 3 years, I pointed out to the board. If it's suddenly a problem, we need to understand why, and we need to apply the rule fairly to everyone. Brenda Lewis, as the new president, nodded. That's fair. We've been trying to clean up enforcement, but you're right that we can't single people out. Tom, would you be willing to move the boat to your side yard with some screening? We can help coordinate a neighborhood-wide enforcement campaign so everyone's treated the same. Tom agreed, and the issue was resolved in one meeting without lawyers, without threats, and without anyone filing a lawsuit. It was such a simple solution, but it required people acting in good faith and communicating honestly. That's what had been missing under Patricia Henderson's regime: good faith. Every interaction had been adversarial, every dispute a battle. The new approach wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and that was a massive improvement. As fall approached and the garden began to wind down for the season, I reflected on the journey. A year earlier, I'd been standing in this same spot being told I was trespassing on my own land. I'd been threatened, had my property destroyed, and been dragged into a legal battle I never wanted. But I'd fought back. I'd proven the truth. And in the process, I'd helped change an entire community for the better. The quiet title action had done exactly what the name suggested. It had quieted the noise, the false claims, the chaos of competing allegations. The court had spoken with clarity. This land was mine. It had always been mine. And the HOA's 20-year claim had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. I planted garlic cloves in neat rows one October afternoon, thinking about next year's harvest. The garlic would sleep underground all winter, growing roots in the cold, and emerge in spring to produce a crop that would last for months. It was a good metaphor for everything that had happened. Sometimes you have to endure a difficult season to reap the rewards later. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Final accounting on the settlement just came through. After all expenses, you're getting an additional $3,200 from the insurance company. They found some documentation errors that entitled plaintiffs to a bit more. I smiled and typed back, "Guess I'm upgrading to the deluxe greenhouse." The money wasn't why I'd fought. The principle was what mattered: the right to own what was mine, to use my property as I saw fit within reasonable bounds, and to not be bullied by people who confused authority with tyranny. But the money didn't hurt, and it would go toward making my garden even better. I thought about Patricia Henderson sometimes, wondering if she'd really learned anything, or if she was just biding her time until she could try to regain power. I thought about all the homeowners who'd suffered under her rule and never fought back because they didn't think they could win. I thought about the ones who'd paid money they shouldn't have paid, accepted restrictions they shouldn't have accepted, lived in fear of violation notices and fines. The system had failed them for years. It had allowed a small group of people to abuse their positions without meaningful oversight. But when finally challenged, when forced to prove their claims in a court of law with actual evidence and legal standards, the system had worked. That was the lesson I wanted people to take from this. HOA boards are not above the law. Covenants are not absolute. Property rights matter, and they can be defended. If someone tells you they own your land, make them prove it. If someone tries to fine you or restrict you or punish you, demand to see the actual authority for their actions. And if they can't prove it, if their documents are vague or their claims are unsupported, don't be afraid to fight back. Yes, it might be expensive. Yes, it might be stressful. Yes, it might take time and energy and emotional resources, but your home is worth fighting for. Your property rights are worth defending. And communities are better when power is checked, when accountability exists, when people stand up to bullies. I harvested the last of the tomatoes in late October, before the first frost. They were small, struggling to ripen in the decreasing sunlight, but they were mine. Grown in my soil on my land that I'd defended and proven ownership of through proper legal channels. The quiet title judgment sat in a fireproof safe in my office, along with the settlement agreement and all the documentation from the case. I didn't look at them often, but knowing they were there provided comfort. If anyone ever questioned my ownership again, I had the ultimate proof: a court order, recorded in the land records, declaring my title clear and unchallenged. The HOA had claimed my land for 20 years, at least in their own minds. They'd treated it as theirs, made plans for it, and expected everyone to simply accept their authority. But when truth met fiction in a courtroom, when vague declarations met professional surveys, when fabricated evidence met authentic documentation, the outcome was never in doubt. They'd never owned a single acre, not 1 square foot, not for 20 years or 20 minutes. The land had always belonged to the lawful owners: the Mitchells, the Rodriguezes, Jennifer Pratt, and now me. The quiet title action hadn't created new rights. It had simply confirmed the rights that had existed all along. As winter set in and the garden beds lay dormant under frost, I started planning for spring. More vegetables, maybe some fruit trees along the back fence, possibly a beehive if I could convince the new HOA board to approve it. The Freedom Garden would expand, bringing in more neighbors, creating more community bonds. And somewhere in North Carolina, in county courthouses and register of deeds offices, the judgment in Yates v. Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association would sit in the permanent record. Future lawyers researching property disputes would read it. Future homeowners fighting HOA overreach would cite it. Future judges would consider its reasoning. One man's fight for his garden had become precedent, proof that homeowners could win against entrenched HOA power if they had the courage to fight and the evidence to back up their claims. I walked the perimeter of my property one December afternoon, following the boundary lines that had been so thoroughly surveyed and documented. North to the oak tree, east to the drainage ditch, south to the fence line, west to the road. Every inch accounted for, every square foot confirmed as mine. The quiet title action had proven what I'd known all along, but had been forced to establish through the courts. This land was mine, fairly purchased, properly deeded, and legally owned. The HOA's claim had been nothing but an elaborate fiction, a house of cards built on vague documents and maintained through intimidation. But fiction doesn't survive contact with facts. Cards fall when challenged, and intimidation fails when people refuse to be intimidated. I'd refused. I'd fought. I'd won, and that made all the difference.